Hello, I'm Greg Hunter, and thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. The guest, a bit of a contrarian, his name is Rick Ackerman. He also hails from the website Rick's Picks. He's a professional trader. Rick Ackerman, thank you for joining us here on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks for inviting me on, Greg.
Rick, you're a bit of a contrarian, as I was saying, and you think the dollar could get pretty strong right in here. Tell us about your trades and why you think that way.
Well, first, I like to think of myself as being on the respectable edge of the lunatic fringe. As far as the dollar is concerned, I've been pretty bullish for a while, projecting a target on the dollar index somewhere in the mid-90s. We're down there in the low 80s now, and that would allow for quite a rally. Reason being, I'm not fundamentally bullish on the dollar. I think the dollar ultimately is garbage. Each dollar essentially is backed by nothing but debt. But besides that, you've got all the world's hot money clamoring for so-called safety. So they all flee into the dollar. It certainly seems safer than any European debt at this point. And so the dollar is enjoying being the trader's currency of choice.
So it looks like it's going to be some sort of, other people probably feel the same way, but where do you go if you have a meltdown and you're saying they're going to run into the dollar?
Well, exactly. And the thinking is that if the financial system hits some sort of crisis, that the euro is going to collapse first. And although I tend to agree with that, I think that the time difference between the two collapses, once the euro goes down, all these people who sought safety in the dollar are going to discover that everything is really connected up, so that if the dollar comes down after the euro in a financial crisis, and I mean a very severe crisis, it might only be 90 minutes later.
So then it doesn't sound like you're wildly bearish on gold or wildly bullish on gold. What do you think about gold?
I think it's in a very prolonged corrective phase. I'm a little puzzled really why it's not higher, because there's a lot of physical buying of gold. China has more or less given the go-ahead to its citizens to go out and buy gold, and tons of it are being imported into places like India and China, Russia as well. Be that as it may, there's a lot of paper gold sitting on the real stuff, and I think paper gold prices are dominant. And as you know, the bullion bankers make their money essentially being short gold interest-free.
Would you hold gold here?
I do. I mean, I'm glad I did. It's very easy to get in and out of stocks, but the gold, silver, and platinum coins that I've accumulated over time just kind of sit there. They're nice to look at, and you tend to keep them around.
Is that your form of? I always call this to people say if they want to hold gold, and I'm not a big trader, I don't give trading advice, but I tell people you should hold gold as a core investment. It's like an insurance policy that doesn't expire. Would you agree that holding physical gold in that kind of mindset?
Absolutely. I don't see a likelihood really of gold going into the stratosphere. In a real crisis, you might say that the whole world is flat broke, and it's difficult for me to see people exchanging huge sums of fiat for Krugerrands and maple leafs. But I do think that no matter what happens, whether we have an inflation or a hyperinflation or a deflation, that gold will hold its purchasing power relative to any other asset you could hold.
Rick, there are some folks out there that say cash is going to work really good for about 3 to 6 months if we have a bank holiday or if we have a flash crash or some kind of calamity. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. If you sort of play it forward, what could happen? Well, in a severe financial crisis, the banks might not open, let's say, this Monday. And at that point, I think currency in hand would really be the coin of the realm. The collapse that would take the financial system down would utterly destroy the network of the clearing relationships that make it possible for you to use plastic. So I don't think plastic would function right away, but ones, 5s, 10s, and 20s would. That would be the currency that they understand at the grocery store and the gas station. Over time, it would take gold and silver, perhaps junk silver, some time to find its way into the system at true value. But initially, if you go to get gas and you give the attendant a roll of pre-1963 quarters, he would say, well, geez, it's worth $10, $10. You would say, no, the silver in this thing is worth the whole tank of gas. So I think gold and silver will take a while to find their utility value.
Do you think that we have a blow up in Syria, there are big forces lining up? Russia is sending ships, Marines off the coast. They've already sent attack helicopters, according to published reports. The U.S. is, by all accounts, helping the rebels not only with just humanitarian aid, but with arms. This is a real flashpoint. If we have some sort of war in the Middle East, whether it be Syria or Iran or Israel attacking Iran or Iran attacking Israel or some kind of a mistake, in the Mediterranean with the U.S. and Russia, what happens to the world economy if there is a war in the Middle East? Oil supplies are constricted, Strait of Hormuz shut down. What's your scenario there? You've got to plan for something like that.
Well, perma bears have wondered what the black swan was going to be that would bring the whole system tumbling down. Just handicapping it, the conflagration in the Middle East seems like the most likely thing. In fact, for years it seemed inevitable that there would be some sort of flare-up. Israel has redoubled its made clear that it won't tolerate a nuclear Iran, and I think it's more than brinksmanship. I think they're serious. It's impossible for Israel to encounter Iran to sort of go in on them, however they do it, without the United States being complicitous for real, or at least complicitous politically. So anything could happen. It could take nothing more really than a Sidewinder missile that sinks a tanker going through the Strait of Hormuz to double the price of oil, and who knows what that would do. But yeah, the threat of war is obviously a wild card.
You're saying if we have war in the Middle East, that you're betting that the system would likely collapse?
It would certainly be a severe shock, and the system is, I think, pretty fragile right now.
Handicapped a kind of a collapse scenario, of course. Do you see that? Ray Dalio at Bridgewater was talking at the beginning of this year. He thought that things would collapse at the end of 12 or the beginning of 13, basically. And other people are seeing collapse maybe possibly before the election, that we could get into a real sticky wicket with the economy from various sundry, problems from Europe to LIBOR to, cities going under, liquidity crisis. There's a variety of things that could cause it. Who knows? What's your handicap? Could we have a collapse before now and the end of the year or early 13?
I think it's impossible to say when it's going to happen because nobody really knows what would precipitate a collapse. It's probably nothing we're even speculating on. But I do think, I'm almost sure that when it does happen, it will happen in the way that the flash crash happened on Wall Street in May of 2010. Everything is really hardwired. The dollar, we might pretend that the U.S. banks are somehow aloof from Europe's problems and that our commercial banks won't even lend into Europe. But in fact, they're really all tied together. And, given the huge number of things that could trigger some sort of dreadful financial crisis, it could happen this afternoon. So we really don't know. And people who say, well, it's going to happen in the end of 2012 or 2013, if you were to ask them, well, why? What will cause it? They couldn't say. And I think for that reason, they can't really say when it will occur.
What does that little guy need to do to be as ready as he can be?
Well, I would say keep ones, fives, tens, and 20s in a shoebox, maybe 20 to 30% of your liquid assets in physical gold and silver, particularly junk silver, not the collectible coins, and maybe have a vegetable garden going in the backyard.
You think that there is a good probability we could have a collapse, now in a year or 2 years from now, whatever, from now in the next few years?
Well, I felt for some time that it was inevitable, although, anybody who's taken that point of view has been astounded at how long they, I use the capital letter T there, have kept the game going. You've got the easing going on at a global, at a tremendous rate. it's not really having much effect. The credit is going unspent, mainly because, you or I don't really need or want to borrow more. Households have been retiring debt like crazy. And in Keynesian fashion, the government has been making up for that. But you can see we're not really getting much bang for the buck.
Rick Ackerman of rickackerman.com, also known as Rick's Picks. So, Rick, thank you for being on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks for inviting me, Greg.